Thank you. Thanks so much. So, welcome first of all to everybody. So this is a new event. We're moving outside of London for all of our events now, some of them. So a bit of a tester. So bear with us for any delays or anything, and pizzas just arrived perfectly on time. So yeah, so this is going to be a sustainability training session. First of all, just a quick health and safety for those in the office. So I don't know if you have guest passes, but obviously if you leave, go to the toilet, make sure you have a guest pass of one of the Ramble staff. That's me, Negan, Stephen, Margaret. You can go to the toilet and come back in. As I said, toilets just outside the door, so in the lift that you came up probably, unless you walked up, just outside in that little foyer area for toilets. No fire wardens, as I'm aware, present, but obviously not expecting fire alarm, but go down the steps and then muster point is kind of a bit of a seated area just that side of the building. Also no first aiders present. I don't know if anybody here is a first aider. There we go. Perfect. We've got two first aiders. Excellent.
Burn yourself on the piece, you know when.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, introductions. So first of all, who am I? It's not a philosophical question, but I'm Michael Trubshaw. I am a senior sustainability manager here at Ramble. I joined Ramble 7 years ago to the day in the brand engineering department in London. Then I eventually moved up to Birmingham office, and I've moved to a more of a sustainability focus in the Ramble regenerative solutions team now. And also my kind of involvement here is I'm on the BGA early careers group as a sustainability champion. I'm also on, there's also a ground forum sustainability working group. So if those of you aren't aware, the ground forum is like an umbrella organisation for all of the brand engineering bodies in the UK. So that's where like British Tunneling Society, Engineering Group of Geological Society, various BGA, AGS, all kind of congregate. So we've also got a sustainability working group for that. So that's kind of where this collaboration started as well with the other organisations. I'll pass over now to.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks very much for having us here today. Yeah, it's a real pleasure to be able to speak to everyone in person and online. My name's James Taylor. I've worked for geotechnical engineering for just under 20 years now, and I've recently been afforded the opportunity to become the managing director of the business. Sustainability has been a passion for me. In the last few years, I've been driving the company's sustainability and carbon measurement and carbon reduction campaigns within the business. And I'm just going to talk to you a little bit around that during our presentation. Some of the challenges that transcend both, from my own business, my own experiences, and we'll give you a little bit of a flavour of what we can do and how the wider ground engineering sector can sort of all contribute, hopefully, towards a more sustainable future. And this is my colleague Jamie Darling. I'll let Jamie introduce.
Hello everyone. So Jamie Darling, Associate Director at Geotechnical. I'm involved in the sustainability initiatives for geotechnical engineering alongside James. I'm also involved in the ECG alongside Michael, so my role is the sponsorship coordinator for the ECG. Like I said, I'm kind of involved alongside James with our sustainability initiatives. My kind of sway is very much more towards the social value side of sustainability. I do get involved in the carbon measurement, carbon emission initiatives we have as well.
Cool. So plan for today then. So I'm going to give a short presentation now, kind of a bit of the fundamentals of sustainability to introduce everybody to key parts of sustainability. We'll then move on to a presentation, 20-minute presentation from BEL, to talk about sustainability and ground investigations. And then there'll be an activity for about 40 minutes or so, 50 minutes, which we'll talk more about in the future, but hopefully you can get some teamwork going as well. Plan for next month. So this is the first session in hopefully a series of 3 sessions. So they all link together, and I'll talk about different stages of a project. So this one is about more the fundamentals of sustainability and the early stages, hence BI of a project. So the next one, which will be held on the 12th of March in Leeds at Joseph Gallagher's offices, is that right? And then, so we'll have a presentation from a main works contractor, and then the presentation from myself will also look at design and construction and how we can be more sustainable in design and construction as well. So it's kind of going through the stages. Then the final one We haven't got a date confirmed, but hopefully it'll be April, May time. And that will be at like a client's office, hopefully in Manchester as well. So it'll go through all the stages, and that one will focus on the end of life and maintenance of assets and that kind of thing as well. So it's kind of going through all of the different stages of a project, but also outreaching to outside of London, the M25, Birmingham, Leeds, North East, North West, and Manchester, hopefully as well. So that's the plan for the series. And then, yeah, so next thing is a plug for all the associations involved in this. So for the BGA Early Careers Group, if you're not already, join us, sign up for the mailing list, etc. We've got lots of events planned, lots of sessions on Mogi, I know, coming up. Obviously, as well, Registering Society young members, if you're not already a member, join us, sign up for their mailing list. And the same goes as well for the third co-host, the engineering group of the Geological Society. And they also have this International Association for Engineering, Geology and the Environment, who are offering a free 1-year membership for new members, for young professionals, researchers and students. Yeah, so contact the AIEG now if you want to join for that. Moving on. So, got to be quick. Running a bit behind schedule, but so what is sustainability? So you might be familiar with this common definition, which is meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And so that's like a Brundtland UN, I think it's 1987 Brundtland Commission definition. And again, from the UN, you can see on the right there all these UN Sustainable Development Goals. And so I think the concept is quite clear. The actions that we're taking today, we need to make it so that future generations can have the same benefits that we do. And so we can't kind of be short term. We need to think of the future and make it sustainable. But also, as you can see from these, it's not just one thing. It's kind of almost encompasses everything. So you've got the carbon side of it, but then you've also got the biodiversity side, you've got the social value side, and got like life underwater, life on land. There's circular economy aspects of responsible sourcing, and it's something I'll come on to talk in a bit as well, is how a lot of these are all interlinked. But then you'll also find there's trade-offs, and they actually, we're not working on a project, they counteract each other as well. So what's good for one thing might not be good for another. And so it's about maintaining this holistic perspective and recognizing there's going to be trade-offs, but we've got to do the best that we can do. And so then, yeah, so it kind of encompasses all of economic, environmental, social, and health aspects. So how can we be more sustainable? So this is very top level, and you'll see it, I think, a lot in various different aspects of sustainability, is the idea of these hierarchies. And so especially when you're doing your job, there's like carbon hierarchy, waste hierarchy, and the idea is you start off at the top, and then you work your way down. So if ideally you want to eliminate like carbon or prevent waste, and so build nothing, you're not using anything, kind of being challenging the breed. And then as you go down, it's all about, okay, if you have to do something, can you reduce the amount of carbon emissions and the amount of materials you're using, the amount of waste, can you reuse that waste? And then going further down, okay, can you substitute those materials for green materials? Can you use like low, if you're using concrete, can you use low carbon concrete? Or in the waste, can you recycle the materials as well? And so basically, as you're going down, it's using more energy as you go down. So if you imagine at the top, there's like zero energy involved in adding into the system, but as you kind of, so the benefits are reducing as you go down. That's why you want to start at the top, and that's where you get the most benefit. And then finally at the end is compensate for carbon, and then disposal for waste hierarchy. So kind of the worst case scenarios, worst solutions. We want to try everything else before we get to them. And you'll also see something similar for biodiversity as well. Check my time, 5 minutes. So I was also going to talk a bit about carbon management as well. So as engineers, I think we focus on carbon, possibly to the detriment of some other areas, but it's definitely the most developed area of sustainability in terms of the legislation, in terms of guidance, in terms of the actual impact that we can have. So there's a lot of focus on it. And you may be familiar with this diagram and with the PAS 2080 legislation. And so I'm just going to quickly explain what this diagram is. And so at the start, you've got A1 to A3 product stage. And so that's basically accounting for all of the materials you use. And so if you're using concrete, it's all of the carbon emissions that are associated with that concrete. So from the mining of the raw materials, from the production of the concrete itself, and then the transport of the raw materials to the production site. So that's what A1, A2 to A3 is. We then move on to A4 to A5, which is construction process stage. I should say as well, sorry, for the product stage, when you have the carbon factors for materials, you might have heard carbon factors for concrete or steel or whatever, that's what the carbon factor is accounting for, is that material in the A1 to A3 stage. So you then have A4, which is transport. So once the materials such as concrete has been produced at the concrete plant, the A4 transport emissions are the emissions of transporting that material to wherever your building site is, wherever you're going to use that concrete. And then A5 is the construction installation processes. So this is basically all the emissions associated with installing that concrete, that material on site, and how you're building it. So it's the emissions of all the plant on site, all the trucks, etc., that you use, any piling rigs if you're doing piling, etc. So that's where the A5 energy comes in. Also included in A5 is any waste emissions as well. So if you get to site and then you waste a load of your concrete, that's where those A5 waste emissions come from as well. Moving on, so I think as engineers, that's kind of where most of our focus is, but it's important to consider the whole life cycle as well. And so B1 to B7 is all about the use stage of the asset that we're building, we're designing. And so some of these are harder to calculate, but so for example, B1 use would be if we're designing a highway, it's the use emissions of all the cars on that highway. Then you've got like maintenance emissions, repair emissions, replacement emissions, and refurbishment emissions. So that's basically all of the maintenance every time. If you've got a design life of say 60 years, but then a certain part of the highway or building or whatever needs to be replaced every 20 years, you need to replace it 3 times for the design life. And so that's kind of where all those emissions come in and all the emissions associated with repairing it over that lifetime. And then you also have operational energy and operational water use. So energy could be, if we're designing a highway, the emissions from electricity to the road lighting, something like that, tends to be a lot less for the work we do. Likewise with water, we don't really consider it, it's minimal for what we do. So that's the use stage, and you then go on to end of life stage, which is basically demolition. And so it's the deconstruction and demolition of the asset. So it's basically all of the energy that goes into that, likewise all the big bulldozers, etc., trucks that are going onto site, the transport of all that wasted material then to landfill or recycling, however where it's going, then the processing of that waste as well. Again, if it's going to landfill, there's going to be higher emissions than if it's being recycled. So this is one of the areas where recycling see the benefits. And then disposal as well. And then I think the D-stage emissions are all quite complicated. We don't really consider them yet, maybe in the future. And then the other big thing I was going to talk about, that hot topic at the moment, is biodiversity net gain. So you might have heard in the UK, there's some new legislation, I think it took effect April last year, I think, something like that, where basically all, with some exceptions, developments need to achieve a biodiversity net gain of at least 10%. So this permitted developments, so like on private property, don't need to account for this. But if you need planning permission, and I think it's something like over 10 meters long, something like that, you need to achieve biodiversity net gain. And so any new projects now will have to achieve this. And so the objective itself is quite clear. The UK is quite biodiverse sparse. And we want to try and improve that in the work that we're doing. And again, you can see there's a mitigation hierarchy when we're designing that we can apply here. So first, avoid. If you've got a site and there's some lush woodland, rainforest, avoid doing your building there. Obviously, that's where we want to start. If you do have to use some habitat, build over some habitat, can we minimize it as much as possible? Can we minimize the land take of our assets? And then if we can't do any of that, can we then remediate what we are doing? Can we make it better with our designs? And then finally, if we can't remediate on site, we have to compensate off site somewhere as well to make up for it. But importantly, it does cost money as well. So if you can't achieve it on site, there's a strong incentive and make the biodiversity net gain on site, otherwise the developers have to pay for the biodiversity credits, which can get very expensive. And then the way this is all calculated, so there's various metrics. So I've got the, for example, there's the DEFRA biodiversity metric, and it basically categorizes all the different habitats on various parameters. So for example, it can be based on connectivity. So if one habitat connects another, that's seen as bonus points. Distinctiveness. So again, kind of farmland, scrubland isn't that distinctive, but if you've got a woodland or river system, that's a lot more distinctive, more points for that. Likewise, the area, obviously, the larger the area, the better. And then the condition as well. So they can basically get ecologists out in the field to rate the condition of the habitats. So that all kind of goes into the metric and is what that 10% is based on. So if you imagine if you're taking up a large area of poor condition, low distinctiveness, but then are preserving the high distinctiveness habitat and expanding that, then you can kind of achieve your net gain, even though you're developing on a large area, if that kind of makes sense. Not long. You guys will have your time, don't worry. So I was going to finish on regenerative design, which is something that's getting increasingly talked about. And it's something that Ramble as well are kind of starting to focus on. And so the idea here, as you can see from this Ramble diagram, so it's about doing more good. And so you can see, kind of see that like business as usual is we're losing nature. You might have heard of all these like planetary boundaries, like climate change, ozone, it's all kind of getting worse and worse. We're going below like the status quo. And then you can kind of see there's some work is being done and it's trying to raise this up to kind of a net zero. So the idea behind sustainability is kind of net zero, do no harm. It's kind of how it's framed. And so we've lost a load of biodiversity, a lot of nature. We just want to keep it at that. It's kind of what we're aiming to do with sustainability. But then with regenerative design is we want to go better. And so the biodiversity 10% net gain is a good example of that, in that we don't want to just not take away biodiversity, we want to add biodiversity to our development. And so it's kind of bringing everything back up. I think it's a lot more positive story that we can tell rather than just nothing bad. We can actually do good and improve the world in the development that we're taking. And I could do a whole presentation on regenerative design. There's a lot to encompass. It takes account of like this whole system effects. There's like natural systems that we want to benefit and human systems we want to benefit. And there's this idea of like ecocentricity. So rather than humans kind of top of the pyramid, it's like we're all part of the whole network of life and stuff as well. So lots to encompass in that, but I won't talk too much. And I think it's down to the GL. So I think it's the hours. That hour. Okay, thank you very much.
Good evening all. So again, just another introduction. So Jamie Darling, Associate Director at Geotechnical. So me and James are going to talk to you a little bit about our small little corner of the ground engineering sector this evening, the ground investigation industry. The key parts we're going to talk to you about is our approach to sustainability as a contractor, what the main emitters are for us as a GI contractor, and what we're trying to do to solve them. There's obviously quite a lot of challenges for us as an SME, and what the design community can do to help us as well. So very brief introduction to our business for those who don't know. So Geotechnical Engineering is one of the UK's largest independently owned ground investigation contractors. So we've delivered geotechnical and geoenvironmental data to our clients on over 37,000 projects since 1961. So we'd like to think we've got a rough idea of what we're doing now. And we work for a wide range of clients, consultants and contractors across the UK and more recently into Europe. So our business recognises the importance of sustainable business and our responsibility to integrate social and environmental sustainability into our strategic decision making as an organisation. As you can imagine, as an SME of 150 people, it can be a very challenging topic. I think it's probably challenging for all organisations, but we don't obviously have the capacity of the large multidisciplinaries to tackle this. So we really have to focus our actions on where we have the most material impact. So our sustainability strategy is focused on a couple of key sustainability goals I know Michael was talking about that you can see on the screen. So we're really focusing on affordable and clean energy, climate action, decent work and economic growth, and responsible consumption and production. As part of this, to demonstrate our commitment to creating a more sustainable industry, we have publicly pledged to meet the following milestones as part of our SME Climate Hub membership. So our mandate is to reduce our carbon emissions by half by 2030, achieve net zero emissions by 2050, and disclose our progress on a yearly basis. So we're also active members of the Supply Chain Sustainability School. We have directors that sit on sustainability working groups such as the AGS. Neil Parry, one of our technical directors, who's an ex-chair of Ground Forum, sits on the Construction Industry Council Climate Change Committee as well. So all of these people being involved in lots of different industry working groups means that we are tackling sustainability with best practice in mind. So just a sort of quick overview, it's really important for us to understand where our business emissions come from. Again, apologies if people have seen this before, it's got a common knowledge now, but for the purpose of this talk, I'll go through it quickly. So emissions are generally split up into three types. So you've got scope 1 emissions, which are direct emissions, which effectively are emissions from sources that an organisation owns or controls directly. So, for example, using fuel in company fleet vehicles and plant. Scope 2 indirect emissions, they're caused generally by electricity and gas used by companies in their offices. And scope 3 indirect emissions generally come through the supply chain. I've got some data on the right hand side here for geotechnical engineering for 2023. Fortunately, I couldn't get our 2024 data validated internally to get it for this talk, but we're still working on that right now. So scope 1 emissions, 673 tonnes of carbon, scope 2, 79, which is a total of 752 tonnes. So obviously you'll see there that scope 3 is excluded from our current calculations. This is basically because we can't get enough data from the supply chain. The carbon maturity of the supply chain just isn't enough to give us that data. What we can do is we can retrospectively include those scope 3 emissions in our calculations, which is what we intend to do as we help the supply chain to measure their carbon.
I think one really important thing there, just to mention, Jamie, is that the supply chain, they need a lot of education because there's diverse and varied sectors. And one of the things we've done is we've encouraged, our approved supplier questionnaire now says we mandate our suppliers to have their own carbon measurement in place by the end of this year and to have a carbon reduction plan by the middle of next year. If not, they won't be on our approved supplier. So it's getting that momentum within the sector.
Okay, thanks, James. So again, just the sort of total of our emissions sources. So just to give you an idea of where the percentage of emissions comes from out of that 752. So as you can see, HGV, heavy goods vehicles, light goods vehicles for us, 70% of our emissions, as you can imagine. We're a contracting business working all over the UK. We're hauling heavy equipment around the UK and people to deliver site works. We have our plant holdings, so our drilling rigs, geotechnical drilling equipment, that's 11%. And the remaining percentages is made up of our electricity usage and gas usage in our plant maintenance facilities and our offices. Okay, so a bit of context. So 70%, as I said, current carbon emissions come from scope 1 emissions. But there is options out there to decarbonise our fleet, which we have been exploring. So electric vehicles are probably the most accessible to the market currently. We are maintaining some dialogue with our fleet providers regarding hydrogen vehicles. I think the general consensus really is at the moment that that's just not going to be viable for us sometime at the right price point. There is a cost to all of these sustainable initiatives. So I think we're having that conversation. It is the longer term solution, we believe, hydrogen. The infrastructure just isn't there as well. So I think it's something like 15 hydrogen fueling stations in the UK, which for a contractor that works all over the UK and Europe isn't exactly viable for us. So keeping an eye on it, but very much something that we're going to be looking into in the future. So we have trialed several EV vehicles. So studies have shown that for the first 2 years of an EV vehicle, you get about 50 to 70% reduction in carbon. That's because you need time to recoup the additional emissions caused by the battery. The benefit we have is our fleet cycles and our investment cycles are about 5 years. So effectively, if we go down that road, we get 3 years worth of zero emissions travel. The practicalities of it are a problem. There's no denying that. We have done a few trials where we've had heavily laden vehicles. Obviously, we take a lot of equipment to site. We found that most of the vehicles we can try when there's a 3/4 of payload is being used, you get a 30 to 40% drop in range, which is significant. So I think generally we're looking at using EV vehicles for transporting light goods, like transport staff on business. So that's my car on charge at our Gloucester plant maintenance facility yesterday. So that's kind of where we're looking at it at the moment, and that's where we're focusing our efforts. So there is some instances where organisations have been able to use electric vehicles effectively. This is something that popped up on my LinkedIn feed yesterday, which I thought was quite useful. So Unite Utilities are currently utilising renewable energy, which is effectively created as a byproduct from their sewage treatment and their bioresources site in Manchester. So they're using that to power electric HGVs. So they are part of a consortium with 33 other companies and committed to laying the foundations for the biggest and most advanced electric goods vehicle network in the world. That's great for them. The problem for us is the biggest barrier that we don't have an endless source of electricity that we can use in our grasp. We are reliant on the infrastructure of the network, which just isn't available to us at the moment. So we believe there is definitely a place for EVs in the future of our fleet, but right now we're focusing on the light goods vehicles end to try and decarbonise the fleet, because most of the carbon comes from light goods. So yeah, effectively that's how we're using the light goods vehicles. We're using proactive planning tools with HGVs, trying to minimise backloads that are empty. So there is things we can do, but it is a challenge.
Yeah, clicker for you.
Yeah, wait for a bit, Michael. So as I said, 11% of our emissions come from plant holding, so the drilling rigs that we use. One viable option that we've been exploring recently is hydrogenated vegetable oil as an alternative fuel source. So several tier 1 construction contractors have adopted this. It's what commonly known as HVO. We think there's a little bit of a stopgap. People are using it whilst they wait for electric technology and hydrogen to come online and be a more viable option. There is a cost implication with using HVO. There's no getting around that. So again, that's something that we have to pass on to our client, which comes back to education and ultimate client and sustainability. So the photo on the right is of an electric powered piling rig that's been used on HS2. Obviously, it's a promising step forward. The data that's coming out from the use of that is there's been a reduction of 12,000 kilos of carbon per day for using that, which is obviously very significant. The difficulty we have as a GI contracting business is most of our work isn't done on pristine construction sites. Obviously, where we are in the project life cycle very early on, pre-planning stage. So most of the works we're doing is in remote environments. So it's just not really a viable option for us. The picture on the left-hand side is of an electric geotechnical drilling rig that Komakio, our drilling rig provider, has currently developed. So we're eagerly awaiting that being released more widely to see what the benefits are, and to see if that can be a viable solution for us. There again. Yes, there we go. So that all sounds pretty problematic for us, to be honest, to decarbonise the ground investigation industry. There is things that we can do, which we're doing right now. So top left image there is of a waste report that I generated this morning from our waste disposal partner. It provides data on basically all the waste that we generate as a business. That's from the last month, so from the 12th of January to today. As you can see, 97.61% of our generated waste was recycled in this period. obviously that significantly reduces our carbon emissions from waste, which could be significant for us. Bottom left image is of a solar powered welfare unit, commonly used within the industry now, particularly on long linear infrastructure schemes, cable connectors, pipeline routes, ground investigations for that, where our staff don't necessarily have access to compound facilities within a reasonable distance. The supplier data from those systems is that you can save about 200 kilos of carbon per week over using a traditional on-site welfare vehicle. So again, they're all little changes, but they do make a difference. Photo in the centre at the bottom is of some geotechnical drilling casing that we use to stabilise boreholes. There's now suppliers that repurpose redundant North steel tubulars, so they're reusing. So coming on from Michael said about the sort of the waste hierarchy, instead of going straight to recycling, if we can reuse those redundant steels for our applications, it creates a situation where we're not jumping straight to recycling, they can be repurposed, and effectively the carbon's already been spent for that piece of equipment by the time it comes to us. So again, another positive. Photo on the right, an interesting one. That's a telemetry system that we installed in a highway scheme. So this is a GPRS connected gateway. Basically, it transmits poor water pressure data from a string of VWPs that are installed along its embankment, goes straight up to the cloud and goes straight to a connected workspace for our client. Obviously, the costs and the carbon cost associated with accessing this site and taking the data is significant because it's on the side of a motorway. So there is things that we can do as a business to make a difference right now. So just quickly before I pass on to James. So we've talked about Scope 1 emissions quite extensively and what we can do. Scope 2 emissions, so emissions from electricity and gas, is something that we're focusing on as well, because it does have a material impact, albeit it's a relatively small aspect of our total emissions. There is things we can do about that. So a couple of things that we've done at our plant maintenance facility in Gloucestershire. We've replaced all the inefficient lighting with Energy Star rated alternatives. We have a high efficient low energy consumption system within the geotechnical laboratory. Obviously, as I showed earlier, we have EV charging points now. But the two key parts that we're looking at that we're currently negotiating with our landlords with is a solar energy array and a rainwater harvesting system. So that's a picture of our plant maintenance depot in Gloucester. So we're currently looking at a 245 kilowatt system to be installed on the roof. Obviously, quite an expansive roof space, so massively beneficial for us. And this will result in a 44.2 tonne carbon reduction every year, which is quite significant out of the data we've provided. And the rainwater system, we use a huge amount of water in our geotechnical laboratory for geotechnical tests, also for washing down equipment when it comes back from site, because it tends to get pretty muddy. And basically, we've calculated that the usage reduction would be from 1,100 cubic meters to around 800 cubic meters, but very little investment. So that's definitely something we're looking at the moment. So I'll pass on to James now. James is going to talk to you a little about how we measure carbon, how we can present that to clients, how that can be used in raw data, and a few sort of tidbits from his life. Heading up our sustainability initiatives. So thank you for that.
Thanks. Hello everyone. Right, so first of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of carbon measurement on ground investigations and in the estimating process. So as a business, we've come up with a fairly crude. What I would say is, when it comes to sustainability, don't let perfection get in the way of progress. So in this example here, we've made some estimated values on sort of the kilogram CO2 emissions per day for the various activities. So there's some of our rigs, which are the scope ones, some of our plant, which is scope 1, then any higher equipment will be scope 3. So that's our supply chain again. And when we use this as a sort of tool, along with we look at our vehicles and we've got their miles per gallon, distance from HQ, number of gallons consumed, etc. Again, gives us the CO2 emissions, how many times they're going to and from site. This all feeds into a total value for our carbon emissions, and this is about a £1.6 million GI, for example. So 63 tonnes of CO2. Keep that number in your heads for now, because it's quite important for some of the other stuff we'll talk about later in the presentation. But what I would say is, from an estimating side of things, we can now give our clients and engineers like yourselves a estimated carbon value at tender stage. Now, quite often, sustainable and lower carbon alternatives are slightly more expensive and costly for us to engage with. So we tend to, obviously, we've got to stay commercially viable. So we like to give our customers an alternative. So we give them the normal way of doing it using ICE, internal combustion engines, or a cleaner, more alternative, which might cost more, almost like a shopping list. So if the client wants to choose it, or you as ground engineering professionals want to push the client into that direction, you have the opportunity to do so. And they know what the value of it will be in terms of carbon reduction. So yeah, this is just a very crude tool that we use in our business at the moment. But I want to sort of talk a little bit. Could you move on to sorry, so I want to look at whether, when we're looking at the carbon, we're looking in the right area when it comes to ground investigations. So let's look here, using GI data to reduce whole life cycle carbon. Michael has far more eloquently than I have done spoken about PAS 2080 already. So thank you for that. You saved me a bit of time. But there's also another really useful document, which is the European Federation of Foundation Contractors have published a 2023 Circular Economy Guide. Again, this reuse and repurposing principles, and this was focused on reusing piled foundations, etc. So rather than when you build a new product on a brownfield site, ripping everything out, putting in new piles, investigate the piles and reuse them. As a ground investigation contractor, we get scoped numerous ground investigations where we will undertake inspection pits to look at a percentage of those piles that exist on that site, and we can then investigate them using various techniques, such as we will use. More recently, we've been using LiDAR and 3D laser scanning to get observation to avoid manage each of those pits. We also will form boreholes next to these and then put an installation in, and we can carry out parallel seismic testing, because quite often the as-built records, as I'm sure you all know as engineers, don't necessarily match what went into the ground in the first place. So if you want to reuse something, you want to have some certainty over what was in there. And we also will be able to take samples of those piles to look at the concrete, do strength testing on the concrete, and also petrographic testing to check for any degradation to the quality of the material that was put in the first place. Here we've, I said on the previous slide that a 1.6 million pound GI had a carbon footprint of around 63 tonnes. And I've just put, don't hold me to these numbers, these sort of averages, but the average embodied carbon of a construction project is around 234 kilograms per metre CO2 per metre squared. A recent big project I could think of was Tottenham Football Club's new stadium, which is 120,000 square metres. Therefore, roughly we're looking at sort of 28,000 tonnes of embodied carbon. Now, I wonder whether at that point in time, did they do less GI, which meant you as engineers and engineering professionals had to be slightly more cautious with the length of these piles that went in the ground? Could you have done more GI? And maybe when we find out that we're being told, oh, we'll just cut a little bit of GI out to save some carbon, maybe we should be doing a bit more GI. And actually, the bigger consequence would be that actually you save a lot more in the construction phase through more ambitious and less conservative design. So I'm going to sort of touch on that here, and this is quite a really nice graph, and it ties into what Michael has been saying about how to reduce carbon. And obviously the easiest thing is to build nothing, but we all know that's not really what we're in this game for. Designing the future and innovative designs and new construction is really important. So we build less. The most important one, I think, is actually build clever. So optimizing material usage, doing really good ground investigation, looking at where we can move materials from site. I gather that some of you are tunnelling contractors from AECOM have joined us in the room today, and that material that's come out, can that be repurposed? Can that be used on site for other activities, embankments on the tunnel approaches, etc.? How we can do that by doing really good GI. So these are the sort of things that designers and consultants, you're in that really great position where you can have that influence over the client. I think as a ground investigation contractor, I would say we're one step removed. We aren't able to have that direct influence. So the role that you as engineering professionals in your roles can have in playing this key role to identify and minimise the environmental impact, influence over the location and the route, the environmental footprint, biodiversity net gain. Again, it's all within your remit. So it's so important. But yeah, good design, building clever and efficiently will reduce carbon. I finally just want to talk, I mentioned at the outset that I've been driving our sustainability campaign for a number of years now, and some of the challenges I've experienced now, I've been passionate about sustainability, but before I came into this role, I'm involved with a number of external campaign groups, in my personal life, with Service Against Sewage and trash-free trails, through my hobbies, whereby I'm driving beach cleans or trying to encourage people to behave in a sustainable way. And then what I really, really am passionate about is being able to bring that into my working life, and the opportunity to better chat to people like yourselves today. And really, when we look at the world, and you've got, I think, Sir Mr. Trump the other side of the Atlantic right now, he's really sort of closing off the environmental things that I think we've signed ourselves up to, the diversity, inclusion and equality campaigns, which are fantastic. He's now shutting the door on. We have a huge responsibility in this country and as young professionals to keep pushing ourselves. So, navigating the challenges, we really have to emphasise sustainability is crucial for business survival rather than just ethical practice. And then I would say that identifying business risks and opportunities related to sustainability really can get you internal support within your business. Integrate sustainability into existing business priorities and demonstrate real tangible benefits to your staff, so they feel like they can see what's happening. It's really important. Cultural resistance. We work in the construction sector, really. It does have some quite historic sort of attitudes and outlooks towards certain things, and it will take a long time to change things. So adapting our strategies to the existing organisational cultures and being really collaborative with people is so important. And engage with both people with idea generators and those who are implementers as well. It's really, really important. How we develop sustainable knowledge? Well, listen to and understand your colleagues' views. That's something I've really found very helpful. People do have different opinions. It's really important to listen to what they're saying and in how they think they can integrate sustainability into their roles. Educational workshops, I think, something we found really helpful in our business. Things like today, it's not a great opportunity. So promoting these opportunities. Jamie's touched on it as well, not having adequate measurement and reporting things. So you can't actually score yourselves on how you're doing. Looking at your engagement levels, looking at how people will respond to a campaign on various sustainabilities. Are we, achieving our? When I'm talking to the rest of the board, we have quite high sort of diversity ambitions within our business. It's always been difficult. We're really pleased now we've got a first female director on our board, but it's not enough. We want to make sure that we are setting the right precedent. And we're only such a small business. We're a small SME. We turn over £20 million a year. But if we can engage everyone in these processes, it's so good for us. So yeah, finally, the last few bits here is core elements for organisational change. It's for me difficult to get. Sorry, I've lost my notes there. Decision making, incorporating that into all levels. So not just me making decisions as the managing director, but listening to others and allowing people at all levels in the business. We set up a focus groups based on sustainability, and it was really important that we had people from various levels who were able to contribute and become sustainability champions for our business. So that's hugely important. And finally, employee engagement is another really key thing. Creating opportunities for employees to lead their own sustainability projects like yourselves. Just you can feel you're involved, getting feedback. That's really, really important. Finally, final thoughts, I suppose, is acknowledge the limits of your role, focus on influencing others with decision-making power, and leverage professional networks like today support scaling impact. And maintain resilience, continually adapt. As you see, the challenges we mentioned about Trump coming into power, things will change, but it's the right thing to do, and it's really important. And really pleased to be able to sort of communicate our little bit of what we're doing to all of you today. So that'll do from me. Don't know if anyone's got any questions or anything they'd like to contribute. But I suppose Michael for both presentations. Has anyone got anything they'd like to say? Now, skip that on. The last slide. Okay.
There's one thing I would add actually onto what you were saying there.
Of course, yeah.
And I should have included it in the presentation, but it's the opportunity we have, the job that we do. So while you were talking, it reminded me. So I looked up what the average carbon footprint for somebody in the UK is, and it's around 5 to 13 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per year. And then you saw the sort of figure that the projects that we work on are 28,000 tons of CO2. And I've worked on projects where we've been able to save like 30% carbon. And so you can imagine 30% of say 3,000 tons of CO2 on one project that we work on. And that's a massive opportunity that we have in our profession. Like, I think we all kind of know we should be more sustainable in our lives, and it makes a difference when it all adds up to 70 million people in the UK. But the impact that we can have in the jobs that we do is far greater. It's orders of magnitude greater than what we do in our personal lives.
Absolutely, yeah. And I cycle to work as many days as I possibly can. It's only 5 miles. My actual carbon saving from not driving my car is minimal in the grand scheme of it when you look at things like that. But all these things add up. But it's where we can have the most impact. So I think the point I'm trying to make is if we do better design and can create better solutions which use less carbon in them, then those numbers are many orders of magnitude greater. And that's the biggest thing for me, is that there is opportunity there. You're absolutely right, Michael. So good point.
You're saying how you one carbon. How do you categorize electricity charged electric car, which
So that would be scope 2 emissions.
that's good.
Hopefully, obviously, when we get our solar panels, then we'll end up with basically a non-generative system. So we've got that knowledge.
So we do source our electricity within our business from a nuclear and renewables provider. There is a little bit of ambiguity over the sort of whether or not that should be sort of classed as a scope reduction. We are exploring all options on our table. We are kind of hamstrung, so we rent our premises, and there's a lot of challenges with getting it through the landlord, who's going to own the solar panels, etc. As you can well imagine, we're on the right path.
You mentioned that sometimes you provide different services and you've got like a shopping list of perhaps having something that is, more sustainable but more expensive. I'm kind of curious, how often are you taking up on the more sustainable but more expensive?
What do you think?
I think they're quite low.
Yeah, so I would say it really depends on the customer. Now, if you're looking at, say, an investment fund or an insurance management company putting a huge project in London, very much it's all about cost, and they're looking to cut stuff down. However, when we work for the Environment Agency, for example, they are very keen on pushing those elements. There are also, I think, ACON themselves, there's been opportunities where you've taken up some elements of those. National highways have got some fairly ambitious net zero for their contractors, or to be, I think it's net zero by 20.
Net zero
By 20, yeah. So I'm not sure that's actually possible, but it's at least they're ambitious about it. But again, it does come down to price, and this is where there are those barriers to change. And it's something we feel is right to offer, whether it's taken up or not. We kind of know the clients which are more likely to, and sometimes customers will take up some things and not others. I'm trying to think, is it National Grid? We worked on a project in Hawthorne Pit where they were absolutely delighted to spend a bit more money on a greener alternatives for the GI, and were very, very keen on understanding our waste protocols. They were asking for weekly as Jamie mentioned, we use this platform where we measure our waste. We can break that down into individual sites, and they were delighted to be feeding this all into their wider project goals. So I think it very much sort of depends on what to be honest with you, I would say that as consultants, you're probably closer to that, what the end client's sort of desired outcomes are at the end of the project, what they want those to be, probably influence how much they're prepared to spend at the outset. So yes, I'd say it's probably about 35% answering your question is of people taking up those offers at the moment. Obviously, we'd like it to be higher.
I think there's an element of reliance from us on the design community to feed into us what the perception is from the ultimate client. Just touching on what James said, we don't get paid to tender, so we don't really want to have to tender twice if the client's not necessarily interested in it. So it's just trying to understand what the goal giving the ultimate client is.
So it's going to be a slight follow-up is depending on the client, which you maybe suggest something different. You've got a client historically always says no, this kind of stuff. Would you want to challenge it? But you're saying we don't get paid.
And that's the challenge we have, and that's where we sit in sort of the structure, and that's where I think my pitch today is to you all as sort of ground engineering professionals who maybe have that opportunity to influence clients at more of a early stage than maybe we do. Before we get it asked to tender, you've been asked to sort of scope it and provide early sort of parameters as applies to site inception, desk studies. That's the opportunity where I would say that if you can maybe influence or steer them, that might be a direction that they would be interested in going, we'd be delighted.
I think procurement, that's a lot to answer for as well. The procurement is set up to favour sustainability to a certain degree. We tend to get engaged by tier one contractors. If you imagine kind of a hierarchy on construction project, you've got a consultant here, tier one contractor here. We generally fall under the tier one contractor for procurement. And it's whether the aspirations of Bramble get fed or are reflected in the client, which is then reflected in the tier one contractor. It is a difficult triangle to manage. And we tend to have very little connection with the geotechnical results at the procurement stage, which in itself I think is a bit of a barrier to creating a more sustainable design and investigation, because there is that separation of procurement stage. So I think that hopefully will change. Obviously, with the procurement act coming in, we need to map change that will make a difference, and it will create a bit more onus on not only social value but sustainability. The whole is how procurement processes and procurement marketing. It's all about value. Most advantageous tender, not most economically advantageous tender. That change is quite significant. Will hopefully benefit our common beliefs.
One thing I'd add to that as well, because I remember going to the GE Sustainability Conference a couple of years ago, and I think that was a forum where we had like the clients, the contractors, the designers, and it was the contractors were blaming the designers, oh, you're not telling us to be sustainable. The designers were blaming the clients, oh, if they don't want to spend the money, we can't do it. And the clients were saying, well, we want you to come to us with the solutions.
I think I was there. I seem to remember Dinesh and the piling contractor got into quite a heated debate, if I remember rightly. I think it was all friendly. I'm not sure. Maybe they had a fun shot in the car park.
But hopefully more events like this, getting people together talking can help really circle that triangle.
Yeah, exactly. We all have a responsibility to try and encourage and embed these factors into our working practices.
As designers as well, we can take responsibility and include in our specifications to include certain requirements around sustainability as well, which is something we're trying to do.
That would be great. And, if you start mandating some carbon measurement within your specifications, I think we're well placed to be able to offer you. It might not be perfect, but we can give you an indication of what that GI carbon output will be.
Yes.
Oh, there's a question here. Sorry.
It's what do you think can be done?
When you say empower, do you mean the government?
But like, yeah, ultimate client.
Ultimate clients.
I think that'd be led by us. I think they are doing it for James. I think they're asking the design community, the contractor community to come to them with solutions. But ultimately, it has to be from the top down. That aspiration has to be known throughout the supply chain. And if it's not known, then nobody wants to. Nobody will be in a position to make those recommendations because they don't know how it will land. So you have to have that understanding of the ultimate plan. What are the goals of this project?
The unique thing to that is sometimes the ultimate client is not aware of the potentials that are available. But it is our responsibilities to also feed into them, just to make them aware that what are their options. And sometimes when you said you provide sustainable option, a big pricier renewable option, maybe if they know there is a sustainable option, they're happy to pay the price for it, but if you never present it, if they're never aware of it, it might be a bit of a, that coming back to that full circle thing. It needs to be mandated by the client, yes, but it needs to be pushed from top as well.
Yeah, I think there's a good point there. Is I think that maybe the overall clients, the board may want that, but then the procurement teams have different goals, their budgets and their desires to get things done as cheaply. And maybe the ambition is that the global group maybe does have some very good sustainable objectives, but as it trickles down through that organisation, we're dealing with quantity surveyor or a procurement manager in one section of the business. They may have specific targets which aren't necessarily tied in with sustainability objectives. They're more focused on driving down price or getting best value for money from what their clients are. So there's all those, and again, it's hard. So it's a new concept. So trying to embed it into existing processes is hard for organisations to do.
Sorry, ignore me. I'm trying to put up the.
Were there any questions online?
I think Charlotte's typing one at the moment. We might have one. I'm trying to zoom out, but it's going to let me. So Charlotte's asked though, plastic is a big waste source on GIs. Reuse is not an option due to contamination, damage, etc. Do you know of any possible future changes where improvements can be made? Thinking liners, sampling containers, etc.
Very good question. So we have actually been conducting a R&D project into some biodegradable alternatives, plastics that can break down. These come from. I was speaking to a company actually, manufacturer. I don't know if you know the sort of sheaths that you put on baby saplings when they go into and plant lots of trees, but then stop the bees or whatever eating them. But they are biodegradable when they will break down after a certain amount of time. It's not perfect, but we are looking into it. There have been various other alternatives, cardboard based. From our experience, they don't really work. It's not great. We do recycle all of our drilling liner and all of the plastic sample containers get sent. So we have a waste provider who we segregate our samples between soil waste and plastic waste at our facility. Our provider then takes that away and it is recycled. So I think we're around 83% of the sort of weight what we use in the sort of collecting our samples gets recycled, which isn't perfect, but it's on the right trajectory. And I think we're aiming for our KPI is looking for around 94% within the next 2 years. So yeah, it's not perfect, but I hope that kind of answers your question online.
I think just to jump in as well, I think one of the biggest difficulties that we have with drilling liner is the environment that we're putting that equipment in.
Yeah.
Obviously we're putting it down a hole with steel casing and then rotating it at speed. So the environment that plastics is going into is quite destructive. So we are looking at alternatives, but yeah, it certainly is a massive challenge for us.
Very good. One more question's come in as well. So how do you see the issue of the lack of supply chain information data regarding their carbon footprint being assessed?
How do we see it? Well, I think it's very diverse because we have quite a large supply chain from the industry that we work in. You might look at owner operator for a cable passive rig, and almost what you say a one crew, and they're owner operated. They don't have the resources that they can draw on to educate themselves. So it's our responsibility to be able to educate them. I think in the presentation I mentioned that, or when Jamie was speaking, that we now mandate that our supply chain have their own carbon measurement by the end of this year and a carbon reduction plan by the middle of next year, which will help feed into our scope 3 recording processes. We're also looking at some Sage, our accounting software, has a carbon measurement bolt-on, whereby that will be able to, utilize some of our spend and help calculate carbon emissions of scope 3 through our supply chain that way. But it's about education. And I think Jamie mentioned the supply chain sustainability platform. That's been really, really helpful for our organisation. And we have also sort of encouraged, when we have suppliers say, I don't really know what to do, we encourage them to, we've got sort of database of what the more basic sort of introductory seminars are, particularly on carbon measurement in that area for them would help. So we direct them in that direction, and that's our sort of what we're doing to champion it is encourage and educate. But now it's getting to the point where we need to sort of mandate that they have that in place. Otherwise, there'll be drift. So yeah, it's important that we're pushing it. Of course.
Like for calculation, like do you guys use like an in-house like a table or like some like let's say for like in the ground investigation, like and they do like a drilling the set like the ground and like specific numbers that you guys have your own like in-house tables and like or commercial
in terms of what the carbon output. So what we've done is we've done some. We use the available data. So most of our plant and equipment has a sort of CO2 emissions per hour. So we utilize that. I know it's fairly crude. There are applications and monitors you can place on your plant, which measures it absolutely perfectly. But I think, again, challenging from an SME, we only have so much money we can invest in innovation and new equipment. And putting all our eggs into one basket like that, when we actually find that the sort of at the moment the sort of basic, guesstimating, not guesstimating, but just average outputs for each bit of plant is enough of a guide. It's not perfect, as I said, but we're not going to let that get away in the.
I think it's kind of compared like let's say for the manufacturing places that they want to like 100 air per day do the same jobs, then it's quite controllable which is like it's quite dynamic and then it changing and then if it's rain then all
absolutely
rain more.
There's so many variables
affected. I think that's the key part.
If a rig's idling for half the day as opposed to drilling for half the day, then the emissions are going to be significantly more. If we're tracking plant across site to get to it, or we're just moving in like short distance, again, different outputs. That's obviously the end goal is to have a much more definitive value on these. But at the moment, we're on the journey. I think is my answer.
Thank you.
Okay, so we've run a bit over time, so we've got less time than planned for the activity. But I'll quickly explain it, and then tempted to maybe if everybody online does it at the same time rather than breaking into groups because we don't have much time left, and then we'll do it all together in here as well. And so what the activity is, I've shared this PDF in the chat and we've got some paper copies here, and so it's kind of like a fictional project. And so this beautiful drawing, which looks a lot worse scanned
and on the big screen, it was obviously like Picasso beforehand, Da Vinci, but if I'll explain what's going on as well, just for in case some people don't know that thing. So up here is like the outskirts of a major town. It's kind of like industrial trading estates and commercial units. And then here is very accurately depicted like raised area, like hillside, like hills going up here, and then a raised like plateau here. Then you can't see it on the big screen, it is clear on the map. There's like a coastline going across here, and then a river valley, and then another raised area up here. So again, you've got the slope coming down here, and then you've got like little some old farm buildings down here. Again, you can't see it too well on this, but there's like an existing road going here, another road going here. There's a train tracks going down here through this plateau, going out over the river valley, back in again for the tunnelers. There's also this little triangle here is an offshore wind farm. And so it's going to be bringing energy into the land. And the red, which stands out, is basically the proposed development. And so the scenario is there's a big American tech company wants to invest in a data center and HQ in the UK. And they've decided they want to have this big tower on the coastline. Okay. And then they've got that red zigzaggy thing, which just looks like a charge drawn on it. That's their proposed road. Okay. And so the task is basically what kind of, and the things that are yellow are actually green, but it hasn't scanned properly. So that's basically saying lots of lush vegetation, highly distinctive habitat, you might say, in this river valley, and then some like pasture land on the top for farmer sheep and stuff. And then all this kind of hatching is farmers' fields, bits of green like coppices and stuff between. And so the task is just to like kind of discuss in groups and like annotate on the drawings, like what are the key sustainability risks, opportunities, considerations for this development. And then the idea is to take this forward into the next sessions. So the next one will be looking at the design and construction, the proposed development, and then finally we'll be looking at the end of life and maintenance first design. Feel free to ask questions. I think it's all quite self-explanatory personally, but so we've got these sheets here for people in the office. As I say, I've shared it online. And so maybe if you guys can talk between yourselves, I might mute the laptop. I think that would be easiest. And then we'll convene. We don't have much time left, but maybe 10 minutes or something like that. To quickly come up with ideas and then kind of share our ideas.